Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Analysis with Ro. I am your host, Ro, giving you the latest on everything media. Today is a very, very special day. We have a very special podcast episode. It's very sad, very emotional, and we're going to get into a lot of feels today. The song that you were just listening to, by the way, was Mama's Boy, and it's by Dominique Fike. Very lovely artist. Go on ahead and check out his music when you have the chance. But, anyways, we are going to mostly be talking about the trauma of Hisoka's mom's death and how it impacts his character. For those of you that are new, I am currently analyzing the show slash book Hunter x Hunter, which is created by the lovely artist slash author or mangaka. I don't know how to pronounce it. Artist slash author Tagashi. Tagashi is a great artist and author. He has also created the show for those of you that are 90s babies, Yu Yu Hakusho. Yeah, it's starting to become more familiar for those of you that have probably watched that show. He also created the show that I'm analyzing right now, which is Hunter x Hunter. And he's still continuing on with the series, but with the book more so than the show. I believe the show ended around like the 2010s, and I haven't heard any news about the anime being updated. I don't know if it will ever be updated, but the book is being updated as we speak. So that's what I'm currently analyzing. It's Hunter x Hunter, which is basically a book and a show at the same time. I do recommend reading the book first, as there are a lot more details, and because the anime is an adaptation, a lot of the characters, like their characterizations, have been slightly altered for dramatic effect. So you may not get like their fullest characterization until you read the book, in my opinion. There's a lot of missing details you're not going to get in the show, but you will get those details in with the book. It's like any other like book to TV show or book to movie adaptation. So now that you're aware of the content that I am currently making, let's get started with analyzing the character Sassoga, which is, of course, from the show such book that we are currently analyzing. And we are going to be talking about how his mother's death has affected his character psychologically for the most part, because that is how I tend to analyze my things, but also interpersonally, as well as a couple of other things. Shall we get started, everybody? I think we shall. Alrighty. So, the stress of caring for a sick loved one, let's just say it is a lot, especially when you are dealing with a low budget and limited medical resources. It can have devastating impacts on a child, especially when the death of a loved one follows it. Well, for Ahsoka, that was his situation, as he struggles to keep his mother awake, similar to Cardamon from another show that I absolutely love. It's from the animated series Bee and Puppycat. But unlike Cardamon, who, for reference, is the 7-year-old kid who has his mother in the bed, with like a lot of medical equipment because she is comatose. She's in a coma. That's why she's laying flat like that. If you see the episode, I'm just going to spoil you a little bit. It's basically there's this beautiful woman. He's crying. She's on the bed. That beautiful woman on the bed is his mother, and she's in a coma. There you go. So, unlike Cardamon, whose mom is in a coma and at rest, Hisoka's mom, on the other hand, passes away. Like, just is no longer with us at all. I don't know what's worse, dealing with a family member who is in a permanent sleep, because that's kind of what comas are, or dealing with a family member who you will never see again, like at all. Like, there's no chance of them coming back because they are deceased. Oh, wow. I'm trying not to like tear up myself, guys. I really am trying. But yeah, his mom passes away. On top of that, I'm not sure this has happened. This is just my inference, but it's safe to assume that his mother probably passed away in front of him. Yeah. And that gave him some additional trauma that affected his adulthood. So not only does he have to deal with his mother's death, but probably just kind of seeing it in front of him and knowing how the brain works, one of two things has probably happened with that specific memory. Either it was just too vivid or just too traumatic because the brain does this to like protect you. It just completely forgot that moment. Like it was shut down. Like we will not remember that moment again. It happened. Any remembrance of that will probably trigger us, but we won't know why it triggered us because the vivid memory in and of itself has disappeared, but like the body remembers. So that could possibly happen. Or two, he does remember, it's still fresh in his mind in a way, and it's just basically emotional suppression where it's like, keep it down, keep it pushed down, and it won't, and those emotions about that specific event won't really pop up until like something else triggers it like really bad to the point where it can no longer be hidden. Either way is bad. And either way is dealing with like the effects of trauma in different ways. With him, of course, we're going to talk about this a bit later. He did not end up with like PTSD, at least not in the traditional sense. He probably still has some symptoms of it, but he ended up with like ASPD. And having a cluster B disorder activated by trauma, it's a little different from someone who has like PTSD or CPTSD. Of course, you have like very blatant differences. So we'll talk about that a little later. Point is, the trauma definitely has affected him and impacted him in a way that I don't think anybody else can truly understand. I don't think you could understand even if you wanted to. So there's that. But you know what? That's definitely okay. Yeah, that's okay. Maybe it's not. I'm not sure. But the next section will kind of talk more about how he took care of his mother at least, or how he probably spent time with his mother when she was sick before she no longer ended up with him on this earth. So we will take a very quick break, and then when we come back, we will talk even more about how he spent his time with his mom, and then we will just continue on from there, everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed your break because we are about to get a lot more intense with our feelings. So be prepared with a tissue box. That's all I'm going to say. So this time we are going to be talking more about Hisoka's mom's passing, but more so in the sense of like understanding the relationship that they had with each other before she passed away, and of course the process of her passing away, and kind of like understanding um the effects of that mentally for Hisoka. So now we're getting into that part, and this is seeing your mother come closer to the light. So as his mother gets closer to her devastating end, and the realization sinks in that her time on this earth is fading, Hisoka then prepares to say his final goodbye. The memories of her teaching him cartomancy are then collected in his mind, which is the practice of using cards for divination reasons. And again, this is how Romani people have cartomancy. I believe there's different versions. Wiccans have their version, but I believe it originated from Romani people, and theirs is based on Hindu beliefs. So that's what the divinations originate from. So they have their cards, and there's a system of, I believe, like 12 If I'm remembering, there's like 12 different cards for cartomancy, and it's like tarot cards. But they can also do it with like a deck of play cards, like the ones you use for poker and stuff. So they could do that, and they also have like tarot cards. And they basically read divinations, which is like what your life is going to be like, the spiritual world, things of that nature. So they have those cards, and she used that probably with Nen, right? So, like, along with that, and I'm pretty sure, like, with Nen, there was also the water divination test. So, them already being aware of that and them also having the water divination test, I do highly believe, like, again, she was the one who taught him Nen first. Because he was natural born, which basically means he was born with this power. So as soon as she discovered that, it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna teach you my son because I have Nen too. I believe like both his parents had Nen, and I also have a theory about his dad being a hunter, and I think I'll talk about that on my live stream soon. But divination cards. She might have also taught him some philosophy and spirituality along with Nen. So she basically was this man's rock. She has taught him everything that he knows early on before he went to his manager later in the pre-canons when he again was ages probably 10 to 12. So before that, it's like, how do you know so much? And he clues it in and tells Meritno, who is his manager during that time, this is what Hisoka said. The small evidence of Hisoka's mother being his first teacher, at least to me, indicated it's like, oh yeah, this woman was the first to teach him everything. Like, that's where he got it from. Of course it would be. The evidence that we have for that would be in Hisoka's statement in the pre-canon on page 17, in which he states this about his mother. My mother was a very skilled lady, and that should give you a good clue that basically this woman brought him love and wisdom and guidance, and now that woman is leaving because she's no longer going to be with us soon, right? And that brings some grief. Of course it does. And grief comes with symptoms and pain and strife. And of course, we're going to talk about those symptoms because it feels like an illness. I don't know how to describe grief either. I went through it many times in my life too, but to this day, I don't know how to describe it. But it does come with symptoms in the medical sense. So that's what we're going to be talking about in the next section. So there will be another break. You're going to need it. Trust and belief. You're definitely going to need it this next break. But before we get into that break and diving into the profound psychological effects of grief and explore how it uniquely shaped Hisoka's journey, I kind of all want us to just visualize, or not even visualize, probably just remember a time in which grief has impacted you. At least for me, it was most recent. When I felt grief, and this is why it feels like an illness to me, my body just completely shut down. I completely lost my mind at that point. It felt like I just wasn't in control of anything when I was grieving. I felt like throwing up, but I didn't. I was just frozen and on autopilot most of the time. Like I felt dead inside when I was grieving. So I can only imagine for this character to have the only person who cared for you for so long just no longer be with you. I tear myself apart at that point. I would. And honestly, I kind of had. Because again, recently someone that I cared about and who is a family member of mine passed away. Like just most recently. And it does leave a sense of emptiness, kind of. Like it feels weird for them to not be there with you anymore. So I kind of just all want us to visualize or kind of keep that kind of mentality or just remember that kind of experience for this next section as we go more so into the psychological impacts. Because right now we talked about like a little bit of how they were probably close. Like, I do fully believe, like, of course, you have your mom being your mom, but like beyond just being a mom, not all only children experience this. I know this, but there's some only children where like their parents are kind of their best friend. And then to have like the only guy, the only older influence in your life, your best friend, your adult best friend just kind of leave you, I go insane. The crash out is justified at that point. I would go in absolutely insane. My heart is hurting for his character, honestly. It is. But yeah, we are going to take a very quick break. And then when we come back, again, we're going to dive into the profound psychological effects of grief. And we're just going to explore how it uniquely shaped Hisoka's journey when it comes to life. So get ready to then uncover the emotional complexities and transformations that grief can bring his character and just grief can bring overall, honestly, because this experience was a whirlwind for me to record, to say the very least. So, yeah, when we come back, we are going to talk more so scientifically about how grief can impact the body. Hello, everybody. Welcome back from another break. Let us dive into this next part. I told you this was going to be somewhat emotionally overwhelming. A child's perspective on grief. Let's get started, shall we? So, when Hisoka lost a parent at a young age, he experienced what is known as accidental trauma, which is something that I have been mentioning within this episode. But what is accidental trauma? Well, I'm about to tell you. Accidental trauma is being traumatized by something beyond one's control. Well, isn't that just life in general? Not really. When we mean beyond one's control, we mean things like death, accidents, list goes on. Basically, things that no matter how much you try to logically spin it, there's no way for you to change the event at all. Accidental. In this case, death of a loved one is accidental trauma. Of course, the person that passed away didn't mean to traumatize the other person, but regardless, it happened anyways. Basically, you could simplify it as any trauma that was given not by abuse and or neglect. So it's not intentional, like at all, versus like abuse and neglect being intentional. So that's intentional trauma. You see the difference? Okay. So, death of a loved one is basically the trauma that we now see. It didn't happen directly to the person, again, wasn't intentional, but it still affected them. So, the loss of Ahsoka's mother caused him pain, even though he was not the one who suffered. After that, he did not have anyone else. And the adults in his life were probably not very helpful in processing his grief because they might have been going through grief in their own unhealthy ways. So, like everybody else within the village, just had no idea what to do at that point. And again, everybody was like poor and stuff. It was just a mess all over. Like, everyone was just kind of in their own fields, and it was so chaotic at that point. The community was in upheaval, and I don't even know how to process the fact or the potential that like Hisoka's mom could have been an important figure within the community. So that and a lot of communities, including African ones, so including mine, we have like spiritual guides essentially, like witch doctors and spiritual guides and people of that nature. Very important to a lot of our like villages and stuff. depending on what tribe you're in. They do things differently depending, of course. But like regardless, like those people are important. And like if one of them passes away for whatever reason, or like the up and coming generations like kind of pass away, oh honey, chaos within that community is up and about. Like this is a very important figure. So I haven't even taken that upon consideration or like as even a theory yet. But like the more I think about it, the more it's like, oh, it makes sense why the communities and pure chaos after her passing away. Because that was probably like one of the last ones besides him that they had. My God. Oh wow. There's just things that I'm realizing now. It's like that is a lot to actually process when you think about it, everybody. But continuing onward, now his mother is gone, doesn't really have anybody. Again, guide, best friend, just the person that was there for him. It's no longer there. Nobody's helping him process his grief. So now he's going to process it in an unhealthy way. And this was back before people took mental health seriously, anyways. So this was also during the time when we talked about this with like the masculinity podcast episode. There were a lot of, like, old beliefs during the 90s, basically before 2010s, about, like, masculinity and how male children should handle different things, and, like, emotional suppression was huge back then, so, of course, the whole thing back then is like, "I know your mom just passed away, but you should keep those feelings inside. It's not masculine." Like, hello? Let a child grieve, but you know how it was back then, a mess. So, of course, now we have a kid who never really processed his grief in a healthy way. Just kind of pushed all that shit down and now has the mentality of my pain, it don't matter. We're fine. We're just going to keep pushing. Keep it a buck, keep it a stack, keep it pushing. What pain? I don't feel a thing. In his case, it goes a step further, and it's like, not only do I not feel the pain, actually, I enjoy it. Boy, mess. Welcome back to the mess, I guess. He grieved alone. Also, he can't relate to the kids around him. That's another thing that I should mention. Can't relate to the kids around him anymore, on top of that, right? If he even could in the first place. So, like, that little semblance of childhood that he had when his mother was okay dwindled away when his mother was got sicker and sicker, and now it's just gone. Now we have nobody. We literally only have ourselves. This is Hisoka's situation right now. I'm trying to give you a picture. We literally have nobody else. It's just us. He grieved alone. I couldn't imagine not having anyone else grieve with me. When I grieved, I'm very grateful because not everybody gets this blessing. At least I grieved with family. Not everyone gets that blessing. Hisoka is one of those people where he did not have the blessing of grieving with family. I know it doesn't seem like it right now, but like when you're grieving, you kind of do want other people to be there for you and be with you in that process. And if you have nobody, I mean, the pain is like times two at that point. Tried to hide the pain. And on top of that, him just like grieving alone. My God. The absolute devastation of the situation. So, again, and on top of that, him kind of just avoiding the pain and hiding it to avoid appearing like burdensome to adults around him when he was there. Because it was basically just, I can't be seen as a burden. It's how it started off, right? It's like, I don't want to appear as a burden. Started off with his mother. Again, I don't think his mother intentionally wanted him to feel that way, but kids, they internalize things. They're human. They're going to internalize things too. So it's just like, I got to be okay. I have to basically put on a mask. Starts young, everyone. The mask that he has, the persona, it starts young. We haven't built a persona yet, but we already created the sense that having sort of a mask for life is what we need to survive. So just that first implication has already been set for his character. Okay? Avoid being burdensome. Already started. The the mask started to build, which may have also contributed to the development of prolonged grief disorder. So, on top of that, building this mask, we also now have prolonged grief disorder because what, everybody? Again, did not process grief in a healthy way at all due to multiple things, including, of course, concepts of like masculinity, how to process or not process your emotions in that case, along with early signs of dismissive avoidance, right? Kind of just having to do things on your own to not appear as a burden to others. And later, we're going to see how this prolonged grief disorder kind of just manifests and changes itself into conduct disorder a little bit. So let's get started on that. Prolonged grief disorder is the persistent and pervasive longing for and or persistent preoccupation with the deceased, and it feels like losing a part of yourself. I cannot emphasize that enough. This disorder is typically diagnosed after 6 months of grief, and Ahsoka may have developed symptoms such as identity disruption, avoidance, which we did talk about, emotional numbness, a sense of meaningless and intense loneliness, which of course later developed, as we know, and evolved into his absurdist and hedonistic philosophies. Because you got to understand, right? Having identity disruption, avoidance, emotional numbness then turns into hedonistic beliefs, which is essentially life is built off of pain and pleasure. That's the main philosophy for that. And absurdist, which is basically life has no meaning. So this is kind of positive if you want to see it that way, half empty, half full. Life has no meaning, so therefore I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want. Is kind of the basics. It's more complicated than that, and we'll talk about that in his adulthood section. But like essentially, life has no meaning, so I'm just gonna do whatever I want with it. Like, fuck the rules. That's more of the absurdist, like, philosophies. Again, it's more complicated than that, but that really is the basics of it, right? And this coming from, like, sense of loneliness and meaningless, it's like, well, if this is what my life is gonna be, I might as well make the best of it. Like, I'm a lone wolf. A lot of people within the series has described him as such. It's like he's a lone wolf. He doesn't really like, follow anybody else's rules. He's kind of just like doing his own thing. And this probably is where it all kind of originated from. It's like, where did it all begin? Kind of all began when he had to learn, when he had nobody else to depend on, that essentially, well, I have nobody else to depend on. So I can only depend on myself. Life's a bitch and then we just die. BoJack Horseman reference, like, of course, as well as attachment of dismissive avoidance. So it's like all of that just kind of mixes together and creates this. So, along with those symptoms, he probably also became really angry and irritable because having all that happen to you and not processing it correctly, you're going to end up angry. You are just automatically going to be angry and irritable, which then later leads to conduct issues. So, like, basically, conduct issues, conduct disorder. We'll talk about more about that when we get to his childhood mental health section. But the basics of conduct disorder is it is the childhood version of ASPD. And again, it's mostly kind of breaking away from societal norms, but not in a good way. Doing things like thievery, like sometimes theft, sometimes violence. I'm showing the worst symptoms right now. It's not always that, but basically it's disruptions in towards other people. It's kind of what conduct disorder basically is. We'll get into that more so into detail when we get to the next episode in the next section of childhood mental illnesses for Hisoka. which of course conduct disorder again later leads to ASPD, which is what the adulthood version of him has. So he might have gone through the other stages of grief, but of course, it seems like the acceptance part never was completed. It just looked like it was never done. And instead of the acceptance part being there, it got kind of replaced with something else, which we will get into in a minute as to how the stages of grief, breaking down each part of the stage of grief, and why I believe not only that Ahsoka's character never completed the acceptance stage, but that it twisted into something else, which we will get into after the break. Hello, everybody, and welcome back from your break. I hope you enjoyed it. We are now going to be talking about the stages of grief and how Hisoka has dealt with those stages using Bowlby's theory. So let's get right into that. So, psychologist John Bowlby proposes that there are four stages of grief, and we will be using his theory. These four stages are numbness, in which the predominant feelings are shock and disbelief. Number two is yearning, which is reminiscing and searching along with feelings of anger and guilt. Number three is disorganization and despair, which is anxiety, loneliness, ambivalence, fear, hopelessness, and helplessness. And finally, reorganization, which is coming to accept the loss and relief that the hardest part of the loss is over. So basically, his version of the acceptance stage. Now, for Ahsoka, he may have experienced the three stages of grief. However, let's be honest for a minute, okay? I don't think he actually went through the reorganization phase. He didn't. And I know this is confusing for some of y'all because it's like, it seemed like he did. No, 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 no. We're going to get into that when we get to his attachment styles. But the thing about dismissive avoidance is that they seem okay, they are not. That is emotional suppression that you were saying. On the surface, they look okay. But behind the surface, they are a wreck. They are a mess. And they are so not okay. Okay? Which probably also explains why he keeps pulling himself towards death. Because it really is the mentality of, well, life is meaningless. Fuck it, we're ball. Just keeps doing it every time. It could be for fun, but I think it's something sadder going on. Like, this is a man in desperation. This is not healthy, obviously. So again, rather than undergoing reorganization, he seems to have instead suppressed that pain. Squish the pain on down. Squish the pain. And this is compounded by a whole mixture of things. So, why is he doing this? Well, one of those reasons could be the Romani tradition of not looking back until, in his case, his tribe, which is Kalo, observes Dias los Muertos. Until then, you don't look back at the dead. Additionally, his desire to avoid being perceived as weak due to survival instincts of street life and the societal standards of masculinity mixing together because now he has nobody to protect him and he wants to not be perceived as weak and he on the streets, all right? And you got to be tough on the streets. So there you go. All of that, put that together, mix it in a pot, mix it up, jumble it up, and you have his struggles, or at least a part of it, because it gets so much worse, y'all. Oh my God. Now we will be exploring, after that, the death customs of Mexican Romanis and how Ahsoka's mother's funeral might have gone in the first place. So, sit tight, everybody. Grab a snack, because now we're at the last part. We're at the crux of it, everyone. We're at the last part. Mexican Romani death customs. These were the rules that Romani people typically follow whenever somebody's deceased. Now, I'm not sure how accurate this is, considering the fact I'm not Romani myself. This is based off of the research that I have done. So, anybody who is Romani, you could either say additional things or you could say slight correction on that. It's totally okay. This is a learning experience for everybody. So these are the rules that Romani people typically follow whenever someone is deceased. Number one, they're not allowed to touch their dead, so the deceased body is prepped by someone outside of the community. So basically, nobody within the community is allowed to touch the body or prepare it, so they have to hire somebody outside of the community, a gajo, which is their version of saying not Romani. Number two, sometimes the deceased is buried with valued possessions, and sometimes they're given to loved ones. So this means probably, and this is what I assume, an inference, right? That Hisoka may have some prized items from his mom. One of those prized items could be cards. I mean, she taught him how to play. She taught him how to read them. So it's probably one of the few things he kept close that was hers. Oh wow. Yeah, that I could cry after that. That's something. Number three, they either burn or sell their loved ones' items to someone outside of the community. And this is so the dead doesn't return for their items. They don't burn all of this stuff. Like, again, prized possessions they keep, but like everything else that's not considered prize, they burn it. So for Hisoka, again, this is what probably happened during his childhood. Huge inference coming in. I believe, like, after the chaos of his mother passing away happened, he basically was like, there's nothing left for me here. And he ran to the city side because he's in the outskirts right now, right? For his childhood so far, he was in the outskirts of their version of Nevada, which is, I don't know what their state is called, but the city is Glam Glassland, which is Las Vegas. So it's the outskirts, more so of the countryside of, Glam Glassland, which is like the deserts of Nevada and stuff like that, according to us. He then moved closer and closer to the city side, so basically ran away to there after his mother passed away because there was no adult there to pick him up. Essentially, there's literally nobody else. I believe he has no other like adult family members. Grandparents passed away. His mother was also probably an only child, so like aunts and uncles non-existent. So like honestly, there we go. And you're probably thinking like, what about her mom's friends or stuff like that? Probably could not afford to take another kid in, so he was really alone. Damn, that's sad. We're getting into sad territory. It's like he ran with the little stuff that he had, ran to the city side to basically have a better life of some kind of way because he sees the city side as like that's where all the wealthier people are because the wealth divide was probably apparent, right? So it's like, I'm going to go to the city side where the wealthy people are. He doesn't know that without resources, you're probably going to end up homeless, but he's a kid. He has a dream. He's going to the city. Meanwhile, back at the village, they're over here being like, well, we cannot have her spirit come back. Okay? Or in their case, it's a mixture, it's like spirit and Nen. We can't have her Nen reside here because bad shit will probably happen. So we got to burn the house down Midsummer style. For those of you that don't know the movie Midsummer, go look at the end scene. Context aside, basically look at the visuals of how a community would like burn a place down. That's basically it. They did it that style. So we got to burn it down. And burn it down they did. Of course, the next stage is during mourning. Family members do not bathe, they do not comb, they do not eat, they do not shave, because they believe that Molo, or the spirit of the dead, may return for a brief period before returning to their ancestors. Now, for Kalo specifically, I'm not sure if they follow this all the way because of Dias los Muertos. So for them, it might be slightly altered to where like they don't necessarily have to do that given the additional context of Dias Muertos. for them specifically. So for Hispanic Romani tribes, they may not have to follow this one specifically. Then they throw a match over their shoulder and they do not look back, or else the deceased will take them to the land of the dead. So after they throw that match, you forget about your deceased. Like, that's it. And again, going back to the whole emotional suppression that ultimately leads to not having an acceptance stage of grief, that is the tradition. Like, the tradition is to essentially throw a match, forget about it, which a lot of people, myself included, could argue no, that's not all the way healthy. So the next section for Dias los Muertos is basically going to explain a little bit of what it is and how it is from the people who originate from that culture. So you are going to be listening to a short PBS explanation as to how the holiday is ran and what people do on that holiday. So I hope you guys sit back and grab a notebook for that educational experience. And then we will come back and I will do my explanation for Dias los Muertos. And that'll be the end of this episode after that.
On the holiday of Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, grief and joy come together in a vibrant display of remembrance.
Dia de los Muertos becomes the day with which to honor and celebrate the people who you've lost and the people who you love still.
Arizona State University's Matthew Sandoval researches Dia de los Muertos, celebrated in Mexico and other parts of Latin America each year on November 1st and 2nd.
Even though it's called Day of the Dead, it's really not a singular day. It's a series of days, generally celebrated on November 1st and 2nd, which correspond to the Catholic holy days, All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. Dia de los Muertos is also the opportunity to honor one's ancestors. And for Mexicans, Mexican Americans, and Latinos, this usually means like honoring the deep, deep ancestors, the holders of our culture, who've been able to like pass this cultural practice down over generations or over the ages that we inherit.
The celebrations involve brightly decorated ofrendas, or altars, covered in orange marigolds, pictures of loved ones who have died, and their favorite things.
There really is no like singular traditional ofrenda, but then it's also a personal expression for the person who I'm honoring. Like, so my father would want certain things on the altar when he comes back. He's going to want the cheapest beer possible on his altar. That's just a part of who he is. So I have to put that on my ofrenda in order to honor him. That's really what makes them artistic pieces for me too, is that so much of them are personal expressions. They're not just cultural expressions, they're deeply personal expressions.
Sandoval says the recent addition of dressing as death in American celebrations is less traditional but growing, as acceptance of Dia de los Muertos permeates American culture more widely.
Masquerading as death is not like a very long-standing tradition of Dia de los Muertos. It's literally like 40 years old, and it's something that like Chicanos added to this particular tradition. And so for a lot of Mexican and Mexican-American communities in the United States, they didn't practice Dia de los Muertos in public, precisely because it was a way to avoid being discriminated against. It was the performing artists and visual artists in the 60s and 70s of the Chicano movement, the Chicano arts movement specifically, who kind of revived Dia de los Muertos and brought it into many communities across California and the Southwest.
In the last decade, Sandoval has seen the question of cultural appropriation popping up around the holiday, but he says many people in the community welcome the participation.
Mexicans and Latinos, Mexican Americans, make it an open event precisely because we know that Dia de los Muertos is also medicine in a very real sense, that it allows people to heal and deal with death.
Day of the Dead is not the same as Halloween, but Sandoval says the two autumnal holidays have become linked, both in America and in Mexico.
Dia de los Muertos is starting to become fused with Halloween in really profound ways, so that people are celebrating Dia de los Muertos where they may have celebrated Halloween in the past, because now this has more cultural significance or just like community significance.
These community celebrations are one way to find closure around loss and death, two inevitable parts of life.
Death is filled with pain and difficulty. The beautiful thing about Dia de los Muertos is that it allows that pain and that difficulty to be transformed through joyous celebration, so that it's not about just sitting in the difficulty of death. It's about activating that in order to transform it through joyous, raucous celebration, colorful celebration.
A celebration meant to honor the past by those who are still in the present. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Casey Kuhn.
Not really sure how that's going to be processed, especially back in the day where, like, again, in the 90s, mental health, what, girl, therapy, barely spoken of. Barely was a thing. So you were screwed back then. You were screwed. Like 90s, early 2000s. You want to talk about like mental health? Forget about it. It was not much of a conversation back then. It really wasn't. So, speaking of the land of the dead, there is one holiday that we have mentioned earlier that gives many Hispanic and Latino families time to remember their deceased family members. This day that I have been referencing is called Dias de los Muertos and is an acknowledgement of the symbiotic relationship between life and death. So that is the holiday that I was referencing. It's celebrated on November the 1st and 2nd, and the spirits of the dead are believed to return home and spend time with their relatives. So that's why I said, like, for Pacific traditions, for Kalo, like the Kalo tribe of Romani people, they don't follow them all the way because of this holiday specifically. So during these days, this is probably the only time that Ahsoka might travel back to his mother's funeral site to give her graces and talk to her before returning to his life. So basically, the only time where, like, he might migrate and move. And everybody's like, where's this man at on November 1st and 2nd? Grieving still. That's what he's doing. And to be fair, I don't think grief is linear either. When I was getting treatment for my grief, they also said grief is not linear. It's like life itself, it's circular. You might have moments of having the acceptance stage and then you like regress back to stage one again. It is never is constant. I don't think there's like, oh, you're at the acceptance stage and that's it. Like, that's not really that much of a thing. Like, if somebody keeps looping back again and again and again, that's kind of fine, you know? I say it best, and I'm not the only one that said this. I believe it was like an interview of a celebrity. I think it was Andrew Garfield, where he says specifically, your grief represents your love for that person. So the fact that you are like feeling this pain of that person being gone represents all the love that you had for them. I thought that was beautiful and profound and very much so true when he said that. And you know, grief is certainly a journey that everybody has, but it's just different for everybody, you know? But you do have to reach the acceptance stage eventually. And again, you can keep looping. It is fine, but the acceptance stage has to be there. And I think for Ahsoka, it's like it never was really there. Like it kind of just mixed into suppression slash denial continuously. And it ended up being weird as hell. Like in a bad. So of course, after that, life gave Ahsoka many cracks and edges to deal with. So now, not only does he have to deal with his mother's death and poverty, but also the fact that the only provider of shelter and protection is no longer alive. His mom's not here. The only adult that he has is not here. Now he has to provide for himself all the way. Like there's no support at all. So now what do we do? All right? Other family members might have died from the same illness. You have nobody left. And you'll be damned if you end up in the system. So you ran away so you don't even get the chance to end up in the system. We will not end up in foster care. So where do we go? The streets. He's now officially alone in his new surroundings because, again, he went from the outskirts all the way to the city side. So after he fled to the city, he's basically out here surviving on the streets. He's out here being a street rat. He's living the street life. You know? He be thugging it out. So in the next section, when we get to talk about that in the next podcast episode, we'll get to talk about homelessness, childhood homelessness. How did this affect Ahsoka's character? And of course, how did those traumas impact his adulthood? Because again, your childhood builds your foundation for your adulthood. So when we talk about that podcast episode, we're going to be going into all of those details and more. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope to see you all next time. Make sure again that if you are on YouTube, to like and subscribe. And if you are on your Spotify, make sure to like this podcast and follow it as well on your Spotify. I hope you guys have a lovely day or evening whenever you are listening to this, and I'll see you guys next time.